Part 3, Chapter 3 of The Wrong of Slavery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Lawrence Trask, Mount Vernon, Ohio, interfaceaudio.com. The Wrong of Slavery, the Right of Emancipation, and the Future of the African Race in the United States, by Robert Dale Owen. Part 3, Chapter 3. Can the Negro, as freedman, maintain himself? My own observations, together with the evidence obtained from persons having much experience among freedmen, justify the conclusion that the African race, as found among us, lacks no essential aptitude for civilization, yields willingly to its restraints, and enters with alacrity upon its duties. His personal rights as a freedman, once recognized in law and assured in practice, there is little reason to doubt that the Negro will become a useful member of the great industrial family of nations. Once released from the disabilities of bondage, he will somewhere find and will maintain his own appropriate social position. What that precise position will be, whether we shall find a fair proportion of our colored population worthy competitors with whites in departments of art and science and literature, we have at this time no means of determining. The essential is that the enfranchised Negro is as capable of taking care of himself and his family as any other portion of our people. On no one point have our commission found more convincing testimony than on this. In the cities of New Orleans, Washington, Baltimore, Louisville, St. Louis, and elsewhere, we found a numerous free-colored population supporting themselves under grievous and depressing disabilities, without any aid whatever, even from those legal sources appointed for the relief of indigent whites. They are not admitted to almshouses. They obtain no county or parish relief. Scarcely any beggars are found among them. Like the Quakers, they maintain their own poor. When a case occurs in which a family is unable to meet the expenses of sickness or perhaps the cost of a funeral, it is among themselves alone that a subscription paper, usually called a pony purse, passes in the aid of the sufferers. A striking incident, illustrative of this peculiarity among them, came to the knowledge of our commission when visiting St. Louis. At the commencement of the war, there were about 5,000 free-colored people in that city. During a portion of the years 1861 and 1862, in consequence of the disturbed condition of Missouri and the frequent raids which desolated that state, great distress prevailed, and many persons from the country, both white and colored, took refuge in St. Louis. Wages fell to 25 cents a day, and even at that low rate, labor was scarce. Under these circumstances, the suffering was so general that great exertions were made for its relief. For many months throughout those 2 years, the city expended $200 a month to keep the unemployed from starving, and in the winter season from freezing. The Provident Association spent $5,000. The Society of St. Vincent de Paul, $10,000. Private individuals contributed largely. In the management of these various charities, no discriminations was made as to color. The total number relieved was about 10,000, and out of that number, 2 persons only were colored. There were but 2 applications for relief from colored persons, both women, one bedridden and the other a cripple. These facts were communicated to the commission by the register of the city of St. Louis, a gentleman who was himself one of the managers in the distribution of the relief funds referred to. The testimony of all the gentlemen concerned in the management of the various relief societies was, he said, to the same effect, that the colored people asked for nothing. The same was found true among the free Negroes in Canada West, as was ascertained by one of the members of the commission who visited that country and took voluminous testimony as to the character and condition of the refugees who settled there. It would be difficult to find stronger proof of the ability and willingness of poor blacks to maintain themselves than is shown in cases where they hire themselves, as it is called, and still pay their way. We have given 2 examples of this in the chapter on slavery, and they but represent hundreds of similar cases to be found in all the chief cities of the South. In the one, it will be remembered, a mother paid $260 a year to be allowed on the privilege of supporting herself and 2 children by washing. What white washerwoman would like to undertake that? In the other case, a man and his wife paid $372 a year throughout 11 years for permission to labor and to feed and clothe their children until they were old enough to work, and then they were taken from them. How few white laborers would stand up at all under the burden of such a capitation tax? How few, under circumstances of such cruel discouragement, would have maintained, as those 2 slaves did, a comfortable home, tidily kept, and children clean, well clad, and thriving? One hears among current slaveholders the assertion that Negroes, emancipated and left to themselves, are worthless and helpless, and are sure in the end to become a burden on the community. But the Commission has not found, in a single locality occupied by numbers of free Negroes, proof that there is truth in such an opinion. On the contrary, the actual facts are against it. In many free states, colored immigrants are required by law to give bond that they will not become a county charge. There is no class of day laborers from whom, with equal justice, the same demand might not be made. There came to the knowledge of our commission in New Orleans a fact which, more strikingly perhaps than any other we have met with, bears testimony to the ability of the colored population, when emancipated, to take care of themselves. The commission ascertained that the free colored people of Louisiana, in the year 1860, paid taxes on an assessment of 13 millions. But by the census of 1860, the free colored population of that state is put at 18,647. That would give an average, for each person, of about $700 of property. It is probable, however, that the actual average is considerably less than this. Those best informed on the subject expressed to a member of the commission who visited New Orleans the opinion that the census return was below the truth, and that in 1860 there were probably in Louisiana 25,000 free colored persons. Assuming this to be the actual number, then the average wealth of each is $520. But the average amount of property to each person throughout the loyal free states is estimated at $484 only. It follows that the free colored people of Louisiana are, on the average, richer by 7.5% than the people of the northern states. And this occurs, it should be remembered, under many civil disabilities, which are a great pecuniary injury, seriously restricting the means of accumulating property. It is not as individuals only, but so far as they have had opportunity to show it in a collective capacity, that these people appear to manage well. We have the following testimony from a well-known and respected citizen of Louisville. Question: throughout the state, do the colored people manage their own church affairs? Answer: entirely. Nobody has anything to do with them but themselves. Here is a curious fact to show what their capacity is. A great many of the churches now owned by them had been failures in the hands of white people. The Negroes bought and paid for them and have improved them very much since the purchase. Mr. Adams' church is a far much finer one now than when we sold it to them. Mr. Smethern's church was built by white people who were not able to pay for it, and was then bought by the Negroes. Nobody would suppose it now to be the same house, its appearance so much changed for the better. And that is very common. They have much taste about such things. Upon the whole, no fear is more groundless than that the result of emancipation will be to throw the Negroes as a burden on the community. End of Part 3, Chapter 3. Recording by Lawrence Trask, Mount Vernon, Ohio. InterfaceAudio.com.
Part 3, Chapter 4 of The Wrong of Slavery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Wrong of Slavery, The Right of Emancipation, and the Future of the African Race in the United States by Robert Dale Owen, Part 3, Chapter 4. Chapter 4. The Emancipated Negro Will Make the South His Home. There is another popular idea in regard to the effect of emancipation, which has been used for political effect. This idea is based on an imaginary state of things, which happens to be the very reverse of the truth. It is alleged that so soon as the Negroes are freed, they will swarm to the north in search of work, and thus become the competitors of the laboring whites. Beyond all doubt, they have a right to do this, and if they did, no just man would complain of it. But in point of fact, no such thing will happen unless emancipation be denied. Of this, the Commission collected abundant proof. For example, in visiting the Freedmen of South Carolina, General Saxton, who had their 18,000 emancipated slaves under his care, offered them papers to go north, but not one availed himself of the offer. They are equally averse to the idea of emigrating to Africa. The following testimony was taken by the Commission in Louisville. Colonel Hodges, who had lived all his life among slaves, deposed, "The state of Kentucky has appropriated $5,000 a year for several years to aid the Colonization Society in sending off the free blacks, but they have never been able to get more than 2 to apply. Colonization, except by force, and that would be an outrage, is utterly impracticable. These feelings are universal among them. The local attachments of the Negro are eminently strong, and the Southern climate suits him far better than ours. If we could suppose slavery reestablished in the insurrectionary states, the North would indeed be flooded with fugitives fleeing from bondage, and the fears of competition in labor sought to be excited in the minds of Northern working men might then have some plausible foundation. But if emancipation be carried out, the stream of Negro emigration will be from the North to the South, not from the South to the Northern states. The only attraction which the North, with its winters of snow and ice, offers to the Negro is that it is free soil. Let the South once offer the same attraction, and the temptation of its genial climate, coupled with the fact that there the blacks almost equal the whites in number, will be irresistible. A few years will probably see more than half the Negro population now residing among us crossing Mason and Dixon's line to join the emancipated freedmen of the South. A primary law governing the voluntary movements of peoples is that of thermal lines. The Commission found overwhelming evidence as to the truth of the above opinion in Canada West. Among the refugees there is not a single feeling so strong or so nearly universal as their longing to return to the southern land of their birth at the earliest moment when they shall be assured that it is purged from slavery. One of the Commission thus states the results of his observations. Quote, "If slavery is utterly abolished in the United States, no more colored people will emigrate to Canada, and most of those now there will soon leave it. There can be no doubt about this. Among the hundreds who spoke about it, only one dissented from the strong expression of desire to go home. In their belief, too, they agreed with the Reverend Mr. Kennard, one of their clergy, who said to us, 'If freedom is established in the United States, there will be one great black streak reaching from here to the uttermost parts of the South.' Even those who by years of toil have obtained comfortable, well-stocked farms worth $10,000 or $20,000 avowed their determination to abandon all, to sell out, and depart as soon as they could do so without imperiling their personal freedom. Emancipation will directly tend to denude the North of its Negro population. One circumstance that will materially hasten this result is that the personal prejudice against Negroes as a race is stronger in the northern than in the southern states, and at least as strong in Canada as in any portion of the Union. Of this our commission had sufficient proof. Mr. George Brown, a member of the Canadian Parliament, deposed before the commission, quote, "I think the prejudice against the colored people is stronger here than in the States," close quote. Mr. Sinclair of Chatham, Canada West, said, quote, "Many of the colored people, even in this town, say that if they could have the same privileges in the States that they have here, they would not remain here a moment. In this county there is one township, that of Orford, where no colored man is allowed to settle," close quote. The colored people of Canada themselves testified to the same effect. Mrs. Brown of St. Catharines deposed, quote, "I find more prejudice here than I did in York State. When I was at home I could go anywhere, but here, my goodness, you get an insult on every side." Mrs. Susan Boggs, colored, also of St. Catharines, said if it was not for the Queen's law, we would be mobbed here and could not stay in this house. The prejudice is a great deal worse here than it is in the States. A colored woman living in a cabin near Colchester said she was from Virginia, and the prejudice was a heap stronger in Canada than at home. The people, she added, seemed to think the blacks weren't folks anyway. She was anxious to go back. The home of the American Negro is in the southern states. Let it be made a free home, and he will seek, he will desire no other. Whether as a freedman in a southern home, the Negro will live down the cruel prejudice which has followed him, increasing in virulence to a British province, some with de Tocqueville will continue to doubt. But powerful agencies are at work in his favor, some of terrible character. Such were the New York riots. Such, more recently, were the atrocities committed at Fort Pillow. We have found ourselves called upon to interpose in favor of the outraged and the unprotected, but such interposition tends to create, even in minds of ordinary sensibility, goodwill and sympathy towards the sufferers whom one interposes to protect. It will have a tendency to increase harmony between the two races if the colored people, whether in the North or the South, refrain from settling in colonies or suburbs by themselves, for such separation tends to keep up alienation of feeling and to nourish the prejudices of race. They will do well, therefore, to mingle their dwellings or farms with those of the whites, for the effect of this will be to take off the edge of national prejudice and weaken the feeling which regards them as a separate and alien race. End of Part 3, Chapter 4. Recording by Richard Ryman.
Part 3, Chapter 5 of The Wrong of Slavery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Larry Wilson. The Wrong of Slavery, the Right of Emancipation, and the Future of the African Race in the United States, by Robert Dale Owen. Amalgamation. Some may be of the opinion that the effect of such commingling will be to introduce amalgamation between the races. Others that such amalgamation is the natural and proper solution of the problem. I believe neither the one nor the other. In the first place, such evidence in this matter as our commission has obtained goes to show that at least in a northern climate the mixed race is inferior in physical power and health to the pure race, black or white. A member of our commission carefully investigated the condition of the refugees of mixed blood in Canada and took evidence as to their health, physical stamina, and power of increase. He found them mostly of lymphatic temperament, with marks of scrofulous or strumous disposition, as shown in the pulpy appearance of portions of the face and neck, in the spongy gums and glistening teeth. There is a general prevalence of physical diseases. Dr. Mack of St. Catharines testified, "The mixed race are the most unhealthy, and the pure blacks the least so." The disease they suffer most from is pulmonary. Where there is not real tubercular affections of the lungs, there are bronchitis and pulmonary affections. I have the idea that they die out when mixed, and that this climate will completely efface them. I think the pure blacks will live. General Tulloch of the British Army, one of the author of 4 volumes of military statistics, writes to one of the members of our commission, "The mulatto race are seldom employed in our army, chiefly owing to the want of that physical stamina which renders the pure Negro better fitted for the duties of a soldier or laborer. Dr. Fisher of Malden, Canada, thinks that the mulattoes of Canada cannot maintain their numbers without assistance from immigration. This is in accordance with the census returns of the free colored population in some of the northern states, where most of them are of mixed blood. A member of the commission prepared a table of births, marriages, and deaths among the colored population of Boston for 8 years, namely from 1855 to 1862, both inclusive. It shows 304 births, 316 marriages, and 500 deaths. In every one of these years the deaths exceeded the births, and in 1855, 1858, and 1860 the births were less than the marriages. This is the more remarkable when we take into account what the register of the city, in furnishing the above table, states, namely that the number of marriages among the colored people was 50% more in proportion to population than among the whites, being among the former 1 in 58, and among the latter only 1 in 87.54. The United States Census for 1860 shows in several of the other states similar results. In Providence, the deaths among the free colored are over 4% a year. In Philadelphia, during the 6 months preceding the census, there were among these people 148 births to 306 deaths, the deaths being more than double the births. The same census shows that the total free colored population of the Union has increased about 1% a year during the last decade, and this includes slaves liberated and slaves escaped from their masters during that period. The actual rate of natural increase is certainly less than half that of the slaves, which from 1850 to 1860 was 23.38%, say 2 1/3% annually. It is sometimes inferred from this that the slaves live in greater comfort than the free colored people, and that the latter cannot take as good care of themselves as masters take of their slaves. But the facts which have come to our knowledge, touching on the actual condition of these two classes, the slave and the free colored, are wholly at variance with any such conclusion. We believe the chief reason of the small rate of increase to be that the proportion of mulattoism among the free colored is much greater than among slaves, and that the mulattoes, certainly in northern latitudes, are less healthy and prolific than the pure blacks. In support of the opinion that the same may be predicated of these two classes in southern states, it may be alleged that a cold climate is, in all probability, as little suited to the pure black, originally from the torrid zones of Africa, as to the mulatto, with a cross of Anglo-Saxon blood, and that if even in such a climate the mortality among the mixed race is greater than among pure blacks, the climate is not likely to be the sole cause. It is certain, however, that both as regards blacks and mulattoes, their mortality as compared with whites essentially depends upon climate. As this is an important matter, our commission spent considerable time and labor in collecting reliable statistics which throw light upon it. The table on the opposite page, the most exhaustive summary, probably, that has yet been made public in connection with this subject, was carefully made up from the materials obtained. Table of comparative mortality among white and colored persons in 11 cities of the United States. Boston, 1725 to 1774. Sum of annual population: white, 689,000; colored, 59,500. Number of deaths: white, 23,750; colored, 4,000. Population to one death: white, 29.10; colored, 14.90. Boston, 1855 to 59, 1861 to 62. Number of years of both, 57. Sum of annual population. White, 1,188,452. Colored, 15,620. Number of deaths. White, 27,522. Colored, 500. Population to one death. White, 43.18. Colored, 31.24. New Bedford, 1861, 62, and 63. Number of years, 3. Sum of annual population. White, 65,259. Colored, 4,746. Number of deaths. White, 1,550. Colored, 179. Population to one death. White, 42.09. Colored, 26.51. Providence, 1840 to 1863. Number of years, 24. Sum of annual population. White, 958,028. Colored, 35,349. Number of deaths. White, 20,744. Colored, 1,306. Population to one death. White, 46.25. Colored, 27.06. New York, 1821, 1824 to 29, 1831 to 36, 1838 to 62. Number of years, 38. Sum of annual population. White, 15,427,466. Colored, 531,544. Number of deaths. White, 479,879. Colored, 20,428. Population to one death. White, 32.14. Colored, 25.39. Buffalo, 1854 to 58, 1862 to 63. Number of years, 7. Sum of annual population. White, 530,582. Colored, 5,466. Number of deaths. White, 14,013. Colored, 120. Population to one death. White, 37.86. Colored, 45.55. Footnote. This being the sole exception among northern cities to what seems the general rule, to wit, that the mortality among blacks is much greater than among whites, we may reasonably suppose some inaccuracy in returns. End footnote. Philadelphia, 1821 to 1862. Number of years, 42. Sum of annual population. White, 12,466,457. Colored, 750,996. Number of deaths. White, 269,824. Colored, 26,397. Population to one death. White, 46.22. Colored, 28.45. Baltimore, 1818, 1824 to 25, 1827 to 29, 1833 to 34, 1836 to 63. Number of years, 38. Sum of annual population. White, 4,294,476. Colored, 859,025. Number of deaths. White, 107,623. Colored, 26,551. Population to one death. White, 39.90. Colored, 32.34. Washington, 1849 to 60. Number of years, 12. Sum of annual population. White, 455,754. Colored, 126,305. Number of deaths. White, 8,869. Colored, 2,723. Population to one death. White, 51.38. Colored, 46.36. Footnote: the great apparent salubrity among both classes in Washington is not, probably, to be ascribed either to the climate or the mode of life, but to the fact that a large proportion of the population are mere sojourners there for a few years during the working period of life, when the rate of mortality is lowest. End footnote. Charleston, 1828 to 57. Number of years, 30. Sum of annual population. White, 457,756. Colored, 523,536. Number of deaths. White, 13,945. Colored, 16,868. Population to one death. White, 32.83. Colored, 31.03. New Orleans, 1849 to 50, 1856, and 2/3 of 1855, 1860. Number of years, 4 2/3. Sum of annual population. White, 547,523. Colored, 121,343. Number of deaths. White, 32,143. Colored, 6,277. Population to one death. White, 17.03. Colored, 19.51. Memphis, 1851 to 53. Number of years, 3. Sum of annual population. White, 24,126. Colored, 8,043. Number of deaths. White, 1,406. Colored, 428. Population to one death. White, 17.17. Colored, 18.79. 11 cities total. Sum of annual population. White, 37,104,879. Colored, 3,031,473. Number of deaths. White, 1,001,268. Colored, 106,217. Population to one death. White, 37.57, 2.699%. Colored, 28.54, 3.503%. End of table. The total sum of white lives upon which the above calculations are based is, as will be observed, upwards of 37 millions, of colored lives upwards of 3 millions, while the deaths among whites are over 1 million, and among the colored over 100,000. The general inference from records on so large a scale may be taken as substantially correct, even if we admit the probability of partial inaccuracies in some of the returns. Thus we reach several interesting facts. The rate of annual deaths among the whites is less than 2 3/4%, or about 1 to every 37 of the living. Among the colored, about 3.5%, or 1 in every 28, or exactly 1 in 37.57 whites against 1 in 28.54 colored. I remark further that the mortality diminishes as we approach our own time, in Boston especially. In that city between 1725 and 1774, the average annual mortality was among whites 1 in 29.10, and among colored 1 in 14.9, whereas from 1855 to 1862 it was but 1 in 43 among whites and 1 in 31 among colored. This accords with the well-known fact that the average length of life in the United States is greater in this century than it was in the last. Again, the table shows that the mortality among blacks in the northern cities is considerably greater than among whites, while in the southern cities it averages about the same. As the returns from which this table is compiled do not distinguish between blacks and mulattoes, it gives us no information as to the relative mortality among these two classes. On that point it behooves us to abstain from confident generalizing in the absence of more exact and more extended statistical data. This, however, we may say. It would appear that there are certain races of men that cross between which produce a race quite equal to either of the progenitors. This is said to be true of the Turk and the African. It may be that the Anglo-Saxon and the African, extreme varieties, are less suited to each other, and that the mixed race degenerates. Indeed, as far as a limited range of facts go, there seems a probability in favor of the opinion expressed by a member of the Commission that the mulatto, considered in his animal nature, lacks the innervation and spring of the pure blacks and whites, and that the organic inferiority is shown in less power of resisting destructive agencies, in less fecundity, and less longevity. If this be so, then amalgamation of these two races is in itself a physical evil injurious to both, a practice which ought to be discouraged by public opinion and avoided by all who consider it a duty, as parents, to transmit to their offspring the best conditions for sound health and physical well-being. Like other evils of the kind, however, this is beyond the legitimate reach of legislation. I believe that the effect of general emancipation will be to discourage amalgamation. It is rare in Canada, and public opinion there, among blacks as well as whites, is against it. Bishop Green of the Methodist Church, Canada, deposed, "You do not see any of our respectable people here marrying any persons but their own associates." John Kinney, an intelligent colored man, said, "The majority of the colored people don't like the intermarriage of colored and white people." Colonel Stevenson said, "The colored people don't like to have one of their color marry a white woman." Such marriages do occur in Canada, but they are rare. De Tocqueville had already remarked that emancipation, which might be supposed to favor amalgamation, does in point of fact repress it. Amalgamation, in its worst form, is the offspring of slavery. The facts seem to indicate that with the abolition of slavery it will materially diminish, though it may be doubted whether it will ever wholly disappear. End of Part 3, Chapter 5.
Part 3, Chapter 6 of The Wrong of Slavery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Wayne Cook. The Wrong of Slavery, the Right of Emancipation, and the Future of the African Race in the United States by Robert Dale Owen. Part 3, Chapter 6, Reciprocal Social Influence of the Races on Each Other. Aside from this apparently injurious mingling of blood, the social influence of the two races on each other, so soon as their reciprocal relations are based on justice, will, beyond a question, be mutually beneficial. There are elements in the character of each calculated to exert a happy influence on the other. The Anglo-Saxon race, with great force of character, much mental activity, an unflagging spirit of enterprise, has a certain hardness, a stubborn will, only moderate geniality, and a lack of habitual cheerfulness. Its intellectual powers are stronger than its social instincts. The head predominates over the heart. There is little that is emotional in its religion. It is not devoid of instinctive devotion, but neither is such devotion a ruling element. It is a race more calculated to call forth respect than love, better fitted to do than to enjoy. The African race is in many respects the reverse of this. Genial, lively, docile, emotional, the affections rule. The social instincts maintain the ascendant. Except under cruel repression, its cheerfulness and love of mirth overflow with the exuberance of childhood. It is devotional by feeling. It is a knowing rather than a thinking race. Its perceptive faculties are stronger than its reflective powers. It is well fitted to occupy useful stations in life, but such as require quick observation rather than comprehensive views or strong sense. It is little given to stirring enterprise, but rather to quiet accumulation. It is not a race that will ever take a lead in the material improvements of the world, but it will make for itself, whenever it has fair play, respectable positions, comfortable homes. Footnote: the surest sign of their thrift is the appearance of their dwelling houses, farms, stock, tools, and the like. In these, moreover, we find encouraging signs for the Negro, because they show that he feels so strongly the family instinct and the desire to possess land and a dwelling place. Supplemental Report A, page 62. End footnote. As regards to the virtues of humility, loving kindness, resignation under adversity, reliance on divine providence, this race exhibits these, as a general rule, in a more marked manner than does the Anglo-Saxon. Nor do we find among them a spirit of revenge or bloodthirstiness or rancorous ill will towards their oppressors. Footnote: Canada is full of men and women who, in the first half of their lives, were witnesses and sufferers of such indignities and wrongs as would burn into most white men's souls and make them pass the last half in plotting vengeance. Not so these people. They cherish no spirit of vengeance and seem to have no grudge against their oppressors. The memory and recital of their wrongs do not arouse such bitter feelings and call out such maledictions as would certainly be heard from white men of similar experience. A single instance only is recollected in which a feeling of unsatisfied vengeance was manifested, but many are recalled where the old master and mistress were spoken of with kindness, and regret expressed that they would not be seen again. Supplemental Report A, pages 97, 98. End footnote. The exceptions to this rule, notwithstanding the great temptations to which the race have been exposed, are very rare. No race of men appears better to have obeyed the injunction not to return evil for evil, or to have acted more strictly in the spirit of the text, quote, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." End quote. With time, as civilization advances, these Christian graces of meekness and long-suffering will be rated higher than the world rates them now. With time, if we but treat these people in a Christian spirit, we shall have our reward. The softening influence of their genial spirit, diffused throughout the community, will make itself felt as an element of improvement in the national character. And, on the other hand, they will learn much and gain much from us. They will gain in force of character, in mental cultivation, in self-reliance, in enterprise, in breadth of views, and in habits of generalization. Our influence over them, if we treat them well, will be powerful for good. Footnote: Mr. McCallum, principal of the high school, Hamilton, Canada, said, "Colored people brought up among whites look better than others. Their rougher, harsher features disappear. I think that colored children brought up among white people look better than their parents." Supplemental Report A, page 79. End of Section 3, Chapter 6.
Part 3, Chapter 7, of the Wrong of Slavery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Bhavesh Agrawal. The Wrong of Slavery, the Right of Emancipation, and the Future of the African Race in the United States, by Robert Dale Owen. Part 3, Chapter 7. Importance, nationally, that the Negro be treated with justice. The last sentence contains an important proviso: if we treat them well. Everything depends upon that. There depends upon it not alone the future of 4.5 millions of people, native-born, and who will remain, for good or for evil, in the land of their birth, but also, looking to the immediate present, there depends, to a certain extent, the likelihood of thoroughly and speedily putting down the present rebellion. Every aggression, every act of injustice committed by a Northern man against unoffending fugitives from despotism, every insult offered by the base prejudice of our own race to a colored man because of his African descent, is not only a breach of humanity, an offense against civilization, but it is also an act which gives aid and comfort to the enemy. The report of it goes abroad, penetrates into the enemy's country. So far as its influence there extends, the effect is to deter the slave from leaving his master, therefore to secure the master a bread producer, and by the same act to deprive the Union of a colored soldier and force the government to withdraw a laborer in his stead from a Northern farm. The practical effect, therefore, of abuse and injury to colored people in these days is not alone to disgrace the authors of such acts, but to compel conscription and to strip the North, already scant of working hands, of the laborers and the artisans that remain to her. Thousands of fields owned by white men may remain untilled, thousands of hearths owned by white men may be desolate, all as the direct result of the ill treatment of the colored race. Such a spirit is not treasonable in the usual sense of that term, yet its results are the same as those of treason itself. It becomes, therefore, in a military point of view, of the highest importance that all wanton acts of aggression, by soldiers or civilians, whether against refugees or against free Negroes heretofore settled in the North, should be promptly and resolutely repressed, and the penalties of the law in every such case rigorously enforced. A prudent regard for our own safety and welfare, if no higher motive prompt, demands the taking of such precaution. We have imposed upon ourselves an additional obligation to see justice and humanity exercised towards these people in accepting their services as soldiers. It would be a degree of baseness of which I hope our country is incapable to treat with contumely the defenders of the Union, the men who shall have confronted death on the battlefield, side by side with the bravest of our own race, in a struggle in which the stake is the existence, in peace and in their integrity, of these United States. We are unjust to our enemies if we deny that this struggle has been a hard-fought one, contested bravely with varying success. A people with an element of semi-barbarism in their society, giving birth to habits of violence and of lawless daring, are in some respects better prepared for war than one which stands on a higher plane of Christian civilization. There is an additional reason why a considerable portion of the Union armies should be made up of persons of African descent. The eradication of Negro slavery has become a necessity of our national existence. But the history of the world furnishes no example of an enslaved race which won its freedom without exertion of its own. That the indiscriminate massacres of servile insurrection have been spared us as addition to the horrors of a civil war is due, it would seem, rather to that absence of revenge and bloodthirstiness which characterizes this race, than to the lack either of courage or any other quality that makes the hardy combatant. For these the Negro appears, so far as we have tried him in civilized warfare, to possess. And in such warfare, it is fitting that the African race seek its own social salvation. The Negro must fight for the emancipation if he is to be emancipated. If, then, emancipation be the price of national unity and of peace, and if a people, to be emancipated, must draw the sword in their own case, then is the future welfare of the white race in our country indissolubly connected with an act of justice, on our part, towards people of another race. Then is it the sole condition under which we may expect, and, if history speak truth, the sole condition under which we shall attain, domestic tranquility, that we shall give the Negro an opportunity of working out, on those battlefields that are to decide our own national destiny, his destiny, whether as a slave or as freedman, at the same time. But to give full scope to the energies of this race in war, we must not treat them as stepchildren, It is so manifestly just, to say nothing of the evident expediency for the benefit of the service, that no discrimination should be made, either as to pay or in any other respect, between the white and the colored soldier, that I deem it hardly necessary to express the conviction that of all petty schemes of false economy, such discrimination against the colored soldier is the worst. Performing the same duties, subjected to the same fatigues, marshaled on the same battlefields, side by side with the white soldier, and exposing, like him, his life for his country, one would think that the innate sense of right would preclude the necessity of a single argument on the subject. What probability of future harmony between the races, if we begin our connection with the new-made freedmen by such an act of flagrant injustice? Let us beware the temptation to treat the colored people with less than even justice, because they have been, and still are, lowly and feeble. Let us bear in mind that with government, as with individuals, the crucial test of civilization and sense of justice is their treatment of the weak and the dependent. God is offering us an opportunity of atoning, in some measure, to the African for our former complicity in his wrongs. For our own sakes, as well as for his, let it not be lost. As we would that he should be to us and to our children, so let us be to those whose dearest interests are by his providence committed for the time to our charge. End of Part 3, Chapter 7. Recording by Bhavesh Agrawal.
Part 3, Chapter 8 of The Wrong of Slavery. This is a librivox recording. All librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Wrong of Slavery, The Right of Emancipation, and the Future of the African Race in the United States by Robert Dale Owen. Part 3, Chapter 8. The freedman needs mere temporary aid or supervision. As regards the question what amount of aid and interference is necessary or desirable to enable the freedmen to tide over the stormy transition from slavery to freedom, it is certain that there is as much danger in doing too much as in doing too little. The risk is serious that, under the guise of guardianship, slavery in a modified form may be practically restored. Those who have ceased only perforce to be slaveholders will be sure to unite their efforts to effect just such a purpose. It should be the earnest object of all friends of liberty to anticipate and prevent it. Benevolence itself, misdirected, may play into the hands of freedom's enemies, and those whose earnest endeavor is the good of the freedman may unconsciously contribute to his virtual re-enslavement. The refugees from slavery, when they first cross our lines, need temporary aid, but not more than indigent Southern whites fleeing from secessionism, both being sufferers from the disturbance of labor and the destruction of its products incident to war. The families of colored men, hired as military laborers or enlisted as soldiers, need protection and assistance, but not more than the families of white men similarly situated. Forcibly deprived of education in a state of slavery, the freedmen have a claim upon us to lend a helping hand until they can organize schools for their children. But they will soon take the labor and expense out of our hands, for these people pay no charge more willingly than that which assures them that their children shall reap those advantages of instruction which were denied to themselves. If we organize a Freedman's Bureau, it should be borne in mind that we need its agency as a temporary alleviation, not because these people are Negroes, only because they are men who have been, for generations, deprived of their rights. Extensive experience in the West Indies has proved that emancipation, when it takes place, should be unconditional and absolute. The experiment of a few years' apprenticeship, plausible in theory, proved in practice a failure so injurious in its effects that the provincial legislatures, though they had been opposed to the abolition of slavery, voted after trial for the abolition of apprenticeship. The freedman should be treated at once as any other free man. He should be subjected to no compulsory contracts as to labor. There should not be, directly or indirectly, any statutory rates of wages. There should be no interference between the hirers and the hired, nor should any restrictions be imposed in regard to the local movements of these people, except such regulations incident to war, relative to vagrancy or otherwise, as apply equally to whites. The natural laws of supply and demand should be left in all cases to regulate rates of compensation and places of residence. When freedmen shall have voluntarily entered into any agreement to work, they may at first usefully be aided in reducing that agreement to writing, and for a time we may properly see to it that such freedmen do not suffer from ill treatment or failure of contract on the part of their employers, and that they themselves perform their duty in the premises. But all aid given to these people should be regarded as a temporary necessity. All supervision over them should be provisional only and advisory in its character. The sooner they can learn to stand alone and to make their own unaided way, the better for our race and for theirs. End of Part 3, Chapter 8. Part 3, Chapter 9 of The Wrong of Slavery. This is a librivox recording. All librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Wrong of Slavery, the Right of Emancipation, and the Future of the African Race in the United States, by Robert Dale Owen. Part 3, Chapter 9, The Sum of Our Duty Towards the Negro Race. The essential is that we secure to them the means of making their own way, that we give them, to use the familiar phrase, a fair chance. If, like whites, they are to be self-supporting, then, like whites, they ought to have those rights, civil and political, without which they are but laboring as a man labors with hands bound. There will, for some time to come, be a tendency on the part of many among those who have heretofore held them in bondage, still to treat them in an unjust and tyrannical manner. The effectual remedy for this is not special enactments or a special permanent organization for the protection of colored people, but the safeguard of general laws applicable to all against fraud and oppression. The sum of our recommendations is this: offer the freedmen temporary aid and counsel until they become a little accustomed to their new sphere of life. Secure to them, by law, their just rights of person and property. Relieve them, by a fair and equal administration of justice, from the depressing influence of disgraceful prejudice. Above all, guard them against the virtual restoration of slavery in any form, under any pretext, and then let them take care of themselves. If we do this, the future of the African race in this country will be conducive to its prosperity and associated with its well-being. There will be nothing connected with it to excite regret or inspire apprehension. End of Part 3, Chapter 9. Appendices to The Wrong of Slavery. This is a librivox recording. All librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Wrong of Slavery, the Right of Emancipation, and the Future of the African Race in the United States, by Robert Dale Owen. Appendix 1. Note A, page 61. Since the calculations in the text relative to the mortality chargeable to the African slave trade and to the number of slaves imported were made, some confirmatory documents have come under my observation. I'd assumed as the average deportation of slaves 120,000 a year from 1788 to 1840, and 65,000 a year only from 1840 to 1848, pages 36 and 37. Mr. Buxton, in his African Slave Trade, after supplying elaborate details, thus sums up the total for 1839, the year in which he wrote, quote, "I limit myself to the facts which I have established, namely, that there are at the present time annually imported into Brazil 78,333, that the annual importations into Cuba amount to 60,000, that there have been captured 8,294, and I assume that the casualties amount to 3,373, making together 150,000. Close quote. This estimate is for those actually landed, as Mr. Buxton estimates, page 169, the number lost on the passage at 25% on those landed, or 37,500 out of 150,000. This gives his estimate of the deportation from Africa in the year 1839 at 187,500. And this was at the time when two nations only, Brazil and Spain, remained as customers of the slaver. The estimate is at least double mine. Mr. Buxton's estimate agrees with mine in the calculation that for every Negro shipped, another, quote, must have been sacrificed in the seizure, march, and detention, close quote, page 169. He calculates further that of those actually landed, quote, 20% die in the seasoning, close quote, page 169. He quotes the celebrated William Pitt as saying during the debate on the slave trade in 1791, quote, the evidence before the House as to the mortality was perfectly clear, for it would be found in that dreadful catalogue of deaths in consequence of the seasoning in the Middle Passage, which the House had been condemned to look into, that 1/2 die, close quote, pages 160 and 161. Various travelers in Africa furnish items going to show the loss of life in Africa as compared to the slaves obtained. Denham, the noted traveler, says, quote, in one instance 20,000 were killed for 16,000 carried away into slavery, close quote. In another, quote, probably more than double, close quote, the number of those captured were killed by the captors. Dr. Holroyd, an African traveler who returned from Nubia and Kordofan in 1838, wrote under date January 14 to Mr. Buxton, quote, there is not only a terrible waste of life in the attempts to capture the Negroes, but after they are seized there is so much of ill usage and brutality that I have been assured no less than 30% perish in the first 10 days after their seizure. Close quote. This from Buxton's African Slave Trade, page 84. The Reverend John Newton, rector of St. Mary's, Woolworth, who in early life was engaged in the slave trade, and afterwards published a work on the subject, after expressing the opinion that the, quote, far greater part of the wars in Africa would cease if Europeans would cease to tempt them by offering goods for slaves, close quotes, adds, quote, I believe the captives reserved for sale are fewer than the slain, close quote. Newton on the Slave Trade, London, 1788, page 30. Evidence of a similar character might be indefinitely multiplied, but I close with an incident related from personal observation by one of our own countrymen, Mr. Ashman, agent of the American Colonial Society, writing from Liberia in 1823, says, quote, the following incident I relate not only for its singularity, for similar events take place, perhaps, every month in the year, but it has fallen under my own observation, and I can vouch for its authenticity. King Botswain, our most powerful supporter and steady friend among the natives, received a quantity of goods on trust from a French slaver, for which he stipulated to pay young slaves. He makes it a point of honor to be punctual to his engagements. The time was at hand when he expected the return of the slaver, and he had not the slaves. Looking around on the peaceful tribes about him for his victims, he singled out the Creeks, a small agricultural and trading people of most inoffensive character. His warriors were skillfully distributed to the different hamlets, and making a simultaneous assault on the sleeping occupants in the dead of the night, accomplished, without difficulty or resistance, in 1 hour, the annihilation of the whole tribe. Every adult man and woman was murdered, every hut fired. Very young children generally shared the fate of their parents. The boys and girls alone were reserved to pay the Frenchmen. Close quote. This from Ashman's Life, New York, 1835, page 160. Appendix 2, Note B, page 192. An act of general emancipation with appropriate preamble might be couched somewhat in the terms following: a bill to emancipate persons of African descent held to service or labor in certain of the United States. Whereas there is now flagrant in certain of the United States an insurrection of proportions so gigantic that there has been required, to hold it in check, an increase of the Army and Navy of the United States to an extent seldom paralleled in the history of the world. And whereas, because of the said insurrection, the execution of the laws for collecting taxes and of various other laws of the United States, heretofore enacted by the Congress in the just exercise of their constitutional powers, has been for more than 2 years past, and still is, obstructed and defeated throughout the insurrectionary states. And whereas it is the right and duty of the Congress to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution these said constitutional powers, and whereas the said insurrectionary portions of the Union consist exclusively of states wherein persons of African descent are held in large numbers to involuntary service or labor, the white inhabitants thereof basing their insurrectionary acts upon the assumption that the security and perpetuation of such involuntary servitude require the disruption of the national unity, and the establishment, on a portion of the domain of the United States, of a separate and independent government. And whereas a large portion of the said persons of African descent, so held in servitude, contribute greatly, so long as such involuntary services are thus exacted from them, to the aid and comfort of the said insurgents, laboring for their behoof on their fortifications and for the supply of their commissariat, and otherwise giving strength and support to various insurrectionary acts. And whereas in an emergency so urgent as that which is now patent to the world, it is the duty of the Congress to place at the disposal of the executive branch of the government, for the common defense, the utmost power, civil and military, of the country, and to employ every means not forbidden by the usages of civilized warfare, and not in violation of the Constitution, that is placed within their reach, in order to repress and to bring to a speedy termination the present protracted and desolating insurrection. And whereas it appears from the above recitals that the existence, within any portion of the United States, of a labor system which recognizes the claims of one race of men to the involuntary services of another race, always a moral wrong, has now shown itself to be destructive of the supremacy of the laws and a constant menace to the government, and that the continuance of such labor system eminently jeopardizes the integrity of the Union, and has become incompatible with the domestic tranquillity of the country. And whereas it has thus become evident that claims to the involuntary service or labor of persons of African descent ought not to be possessed by any inhabitant of the United States, but should, in the just exercise of the power which inheres in every independent government, to protect itself from destruction by seizing and destroying any private property of its citizens or subjects which imperils its own existence, be taken for public use from their present possessors and abrogated and annulled, just compensation being made to so many of the said possessors of such claims, not being nor having been public enemies, as may demand it, and as may by their loyalty be entitled thereto for the claims so abrogated and annulled. And whereas the President of the United States, by proclamation on January 1st, 1863, did declare that all persons held as slaves within the states of Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, certain parishes in Louisiana and certain counties in Virginia excepted, were on that day and thenceforth forever should be free. Therefore, be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives and Congress assembled, that the action of the President, as Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States, in issuing his proclamation of January 1st, 1863, as a fit and necessary war measure for the suppression of the existing insurrection, is hereby approved and endorsed, and the emancipation of the slaves thereby effected is recognized and declared to be an act just, legal, and irrevocable. Section 2. And be it further enacted, that from and after the 4th of July next, all claims to the service of labor of persons of African descent, who shall then be held to involuntary labor in any of the States of the Union, under the laws thereof, be and the same are hereby taken by the government of the United States, and the said claims are hereby abrogated and annulled. And all persons of African descent within the United States, who shall on the said 4th day of July next be held to involuntary service or labor, except for a crime of which the party shall have been legally convicted, shall be released and emancipated from such claims in as full and complete a manner as if the same had never existed, the said release and emancipation to take effect from and after the said 4th day of July, thenceforth and forevermore. Section 3. And be it further enacted, that the faith of the United States be and the same is hereby pledged for the payment of just compensation to all persons who shall, on the said 4th day of July, hold such claims to service or labor, provided that such persons shall make application for such compensation in form and manner hereinafter to be prescribed, and provided further that such persons are not nor have not been in law public enemies of the United States, and provided further that said persons shall have been, throughout the present insurrection, true and loyal to the government of the United States, and shall not, directly or indirectly, have incited to insurrectionary acts, or given aid or comfort to any persons engaged in the insurrection aforesaid. An act couched in the terms here proposed could not be declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court without a reckless reversal of principles as well established and of as high authority as any which form the basis of constitutional law, nor without an encroachment of legislative ground so flagrant that it might well subject those members of the court who should give it their official sanction to impeachment on the charge of usurpation. End of Appendices. End of The Wrong of Slavery, the Right of Emancipation, and the Future of the African Race in the United States, by Robert Dale Owen.